What's up, everyone? I just wanted to hop on real quick because this is a different kind of episode. You're used to me hopping on here and just yapping for hours in my narrator voice or using character voices to try to convey the story. But this podcast is just part of my overall theory, which is that we can use stories, fictional and non-fictional, as ways to simulate how life happens and how we can learn from that to improve our own situation. So obviously I focus on fiction on this show, but don't think by any means that I think fictional stories are more valuable than nonfiction. The stories you hear from a friend or read in a history book or a biography have extremely valuable information and stories that can help you simulate the world around you. And nonfiction stories have advantages over fiction the same way that fiction has advantages over nonfiction when it comes to conveying meaning through story. So this episode is a very different format. This is a recording of a live panel that I was able to do a few weeks ago, where I got to get two of the most prolific readers I know, who you might find online as Alex in Books and Dilan O'Sullivan. And together we sat down and discussed the power of story, fiction versus nonfiction. And we really got into the weeds of how you can benefit from both being a part of your life. A special thank you to O'Shaughnessy Ventures, who flew me out to their company offsite where we recorded this panel live. I hope you guys find something valuable from it. I know I had a lot of fun talking to both of these guys. Let's get into it. I have a podcast called Becoming the Main Character, where I basically cover the greatest works of fiction with a special eye on the choices the characters make and how those choices lead to the outcomes that they have, and using that as a model for understand, because to me, stories are like simulations in the Matrix. It's a way of seeing, if this is a scenario and these are the choices I have and I make this choice, what might happen from that? And so because of that, stories are a way for you to experience. I think C.S. Lewis says, with literature, I can live the lives of 1,000 men and still be myself. That's a paraphrase, but it's the same idea. And so I am just a huge believer that stories are so much more influential than just entertainment. And they used to serve a huge purpose, and they still do, but a lot of them have been kind of watered down to just be entertainment at this point, and I would like to alter that course with the little influence I can try to have on the world. And so today I'm so excited for this recording. Special thanks to Nick for inviting me to host a live episode here. It is a little different. My podcast is me sitting in a room by myself reading off a teleprompter. But I've got some great panelists here today to help take the pressure off of me, I guess you could put it that way. Because today what I want to discuss is the power the story has, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, and how both have a place in our lives. So I'm going to shut up here and kind of take a pause, because I'm actually going to start the episode by reading a short script, because like I said, my whole podcast is reading off a teleprompter as a way of setting up the conversation. But thanks guys for, you're here already, but thanks for attending, and I hope you get something out of this. I'm really excited for this conversation. I'll introduce them as part of the opening. So, back in the late 1800s, Henry James, author of Portrait of a Lady, Turning of the Screw, and others, published an article in a magazine called The Art of Fiction. In it, he made a simple claim, that a novel is a direct impression of life, like looking in a mirror. It was well received because Henry James was a respected author, but in a following issue of the same magazine, there was a rebuttal from a very unexpected source, Robert Louis Stevenson, an author who was also very successful, but to some maybe wasn't as serious because he was a children's story author, most known for things like Treasure Island. But Robert Louis Stevenson read Henry James's comment and said, basically, with all due respect, absolutely not. And so his response was titled A Humble Remonstrance. So he was trying to position himself as, I know I'm not this amazing authority, but I want to share my opinion. And he said, with no mistake, he was basically taking down what Henry James had said by saying, quote, "Life is monstrous, infinite, illogical, abrupt, and poignant. A work of art, in comparison, is neat, finite, self-contained, rational, flowing." He goes on to say that reality hits like brute energy, and he calls it inarticulate thunder, which I love that phrase, inarticulate thunder. But that story and art, it catches the ear almost like a melody in the static. And so that's what I want to talk about today, is that life, and with all these amazing things we've talked about today, from the fellowships and the grant winners, it's incredible ideas that are coming out in the world. The problem is there's so much other stuff on top of these great ideas that is just noise. It's just distraction. It is just keeping our minds from being able to focus on what matters. And our human brain is not equipped to handle the technologically advanced, globalized age that we live in, and it struggles to be able to maintain focus on what matters. And so, in my opinion, the value of story is that it removes the things that don't matter, and it allows us to focus on what does. And it doesn't matter whether it's fiction or nonfiction. It could be Alexander the Great and his conquests. It could be Hercules and his 12 labors. It could be Steve Jobs coming back to Apple after being fired and creating the greatest company ever. Or maybe it's 4 little hobbits taking the ring to Mordor. It could be anything in that realm, but the point is they all share one little focus, which is the stories are humanity's way of saying, hey, eyes on me, this is what matters, this is where the meaning is, so don't get caught up in all of the rest of the noise. And so by following that thread in the stories, we can find the meaning, which is how our brains, no matter how much we try not to, our brains seek meaning in literally everything we do. And stories are a way of isolating that and confining it so that we can focus on finding the meaning that will allow us to make the choices to living a more fulfilled and a better life. And the last thing before we get started is that some of you may be hearing this and thinking like, yeah, I get that for nonfiction because it's real, right? It's like, this is what's happened, but how can you say that for fiction? Have any of you ever wondered why the terms fiction and nonfiction are assigned the way they are? Because to me, shouldn't the one that's not real be the one that's non-something? I've always wondered that. And I finally found the answer out when I was reading a book called Stuff Such as Dreams, The Psychology of Fiction. It's by a man named Keith Oatley, and I'm going to quote just a paragraph from that. People often think the word fiction means untrue, but this is not true. The word derives from the Latin fingere, which means to make, in the same way that the word poetry comes from the Greek word poesis, which also means to make. Fiction and poetry are constructed in the imagination and are different from something discovered, as in physics, or from something that happened, as in the news. Fiction and poetry are not false. They are about what could happen. And so the goal of today's discussion is not to prove that one is more valuable than the other, but to show that both of them have value, unique value, that makes it important for anyone who's trying to, as I call my show, live a protagonist life, should have a healthy balance of both. And so thanks for joining me today. I am joined by Alex Wachowski. You guys may know him online as Alex in Books, as well as OSV's own Dilan O'Sullivan. You may know him online as Dilan O'Sullivan. I've got them to join me so we can talk about this, and we've kind of assigned them. So Alex will talk to the points of nonfiction, Dilan will speak to the points of fiction, and we'll just try to discuss what are the nuggets, what are the values of consuming story in all its forms. And then we have a special treat towards the end. Alex will help us. If you're the type of person who's always saying, I need to read more, I need to find the time, Alex happens to be working on a book about that, and so he'll share a few thoughts with us on how you can make reading more of a part of your life. The first thing I want is just for each of you to establish how reading became such a big part of your life. Share a brief history of what sucked you into becoming a reader. We'll start with you, Alex.
Okay. So I would say I loved reading books as a kid. The library was like the safe space for me. It was just a place you could go to where no one would bother you. But then I think what happens to a lot of people, you go to middle school, high school, you're forced to read all these specific books, like Shakespeare and all these other older books that you can't really relate to, or you kind of need to look up what they even mean, even though it's in English, but it's not English. So basically I quit reading, and I probably would have never picked up a book again until halfway through college. I had a business professor come into class, and this guy worked at IBM for 25 years during like the golden years. So he was the first professor I had that was successful, who became a professor. And he told us that he was successful because of this one book. And that book was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And I was a pretty shy, introverted kid. And I was like, oh, this is just another textbook, just a bit smaller. So went home that night, started reading it. And it was as educational as a textbook, but as entertaining as a fiction book. So as a shy, introverted kid, I'm like, wow, I'm learning social skills and communication skills from a book. Like, this is mind-blowing. And then I thought, like, oh, what else can books teach me? And that's when it hit me. Like, the answer was anything and everything. Like, any part of my life I wanted to improve on, there was a nonfiction book out there that I could read and basically learn the lessons and apply it and become a better version of myself. and I basically became addicted to reading. None of my friends read books, so I started posting about books on social media. And then fast forward today, my full-time job is basically reading books and posting about it on social media.
Dylan, how about you?
Yeah, none of my friends read books either. I had to hide it like a vice. It was embarrassing. My parents basically, kind of sometimes describe them as Stalinist hippies. They seized the means of recreation really early. So it was like codes on TVs, no PlayStation, nothing. So they didn't force me to read, but they had established the conditions that would cultivate
nothing
reading
else
because,
to do.
Fucking bored otherwise. That was kind of where, and then by the time I got older, it was just too ingrained for me to rebel fully. So I did literature in college, but I didn't like being told what to read, so I would read my own things and read the bare minimum to get by. So that kind of imprint for the thirst of forbidden knowledge was kind of laid in early. They also made the mistake of telling me what I can't read when I was young. So obviously, naturally, read all that straight away. Yeah, I was like, this is so exciting. So there's a thrill to that. And then, yeah, ever since, it's like going to the gym, or when you kind of establish any kind of baseline of habit, it's like breathing. Yeah.
Dylan, you're representing the side of fiction today, and I know you read. You know, honestly, what I need from Dylan is I just need like a calendar app that every day I wake up and it's just a quote from something that Dylan's read, because that's when I check Twitter, I just see that type print, like little screenshot from which, you know, I'm like, this is gonna be gold. So I know you read all sorts of stuff, philosophy and history and things like that, but since you're representing fiction today, what is it that draws you to fiction? What do you love about finding fiction books?
So it's not a clear dividing line. I read probably still mostly nonfiction, but I pushed that so far where I'd almost squeeze fiction out entirely, and then I've had to like reintegrate it, almost like, you know, force yourself to eat your vegetables or whatever. But there's a quote I really like, which is, fiction enlarges the circumference of the imagination. So I think it kind of, and the effects of reading fiction, they're quite diffuse. Like, you know, you pick up a nonfiction book and it's like, I will glean these facts from this. I will be, you know, I've learned these 4 things, so I'm 4 things smarter than I was when I picked it up. Fiction is a lot more emergent and holistic, and it's, readers, I do this as well, we're very extractive. And it's like, what's in it for me before it takes a lot to pick up a book, especially nowadays. So like, what's in it for me? It's a more difficult question to answer with fiction. You're like, I know, am I just kind of wasting 4 or 5 hours? But I think the way it affects your perception of reality, like there's a concept I like, which is defamiliarization, which is Victor Shklovsky. And it's like, what fiction does, it takes normal things that you have completely categorized and thus have become invisible to you in life, and it makes the stone stony. So like all of a sudden now you're recognizing, oh, all these things around me that I literally haven't been paying attention to. And I think that translates like long after reading the book. Like there's also the structure of these things, where like, you know, they kind of lends architecture to your lives. You know, you're not just having a shitty day. This is like just the bottom of your arc before, like, you know, the meteoric rise up again. So those kind of reframings, they sound trivial, and maybe they are when you try and, you know, force them top down on you. But I think if you don't recognize the power of story has over you, like it has even more than you think. I think there's like, that's like a current running through everybody, whether they realize it or not. And reading is a kind of way to, almost like mirror-like function. You're like, oh fuck, I've been like following this exact trail along this kind of weird narrative that I didn't fully understand until like someone else explained it to me.
Defamiliarization reminded me of, on fairy stories, Tolkien writes about, that's one of the benefits of fantasy specifically, is that it takes you into such a different world that you start to appreciate the world that you're in ways that you just couldn't have thought you were numb to at that point without it.
Yeah, Chesterton has a thing where, like, in fairy tales, the rivers run with gold, like to remind you that they run with water. It's like the miracle's already there. I just had to like kind of add a twist to it to show you. But yeah, I really like that.
That's fantastic. So Alex, talk to us about. I mean, you are specifically in the lane of nonfiction, and you do it. I mean, I don't know of anyone who has a better pulse, a finger on the pulse of nonfiction books at this point than you. So what is it that you love about the nonfiction genre?
Well, for me, it was like, I just didn't have any mentors, or I didn't know a single person that was like successful growing up, but I knew successful people, they did one thing, they read books. So like, you look at any Bill Gates, Elon Musk interview, they're all reading books. So I'm like, okay, I guess that's what I'm doing. And it's just any area in life where you want to improve on, whether it's relationships, whether it's writing, communication, business, you just find a book in that category, you read it, you apply the lessons, and then you get the results from it. So for me, it was very just like actionable versus in high school where we're reading Shakespeare or something. It's like, I can't really pull out those lessons. Like I know they're there, but like extracting them a lot harder versus a nonfiction book is like, it's right here, just do these things and boom, you'll get the results you want.
Tell me if you're the same way. This is such a weird quirk, but I get such a dopamine rush looking at the table of contents of a nonfiction book because it's like a promise of the value I'm going to extract from it. And so I get so excited, then I buy it and then don't read it. So kind of shifting gears, well, I mean, barely shifting gears, but in your experiences, and why do you think that story is such an influential part of everyone's lives, no matter how aware of it they may be or not?
I just think it's deeply biologically hardwired, and there's a reason like we don't read like How to Win Friends and Influence People to like babies, and like it's like they respond. It's like it's not predetermined. It's not a decision. We just respond to it, and that's how we think in narrative and non-narrative way, like beginnings, middles, and ends. Or like it's the structure of how the day works and how the year works. It's like that's just like I think it's just how we're wired. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that, Alex?
I would say like, yeah, even in nonfiction books, the best-selling nonfiction books are the ones with the best stories. So like you look at the best-selling book about habits, Atomic Habits, that sold like 30 million copies. Then there's a book, Tiny Habits, written by an academic, which sold like 3 million copies. So you have the guy that actually created the field and studies the field of habits, but his book sold a tenth of this other guy who's a better storyteller. You look at Morgan Housel, he's the best-selling like finance writer. He does not have a PhD in finance or anything like that, but he's a better storyteller. You look at Ryan Holiday, better storyteller, does not have a PhD in history. So it's like the author who's a better storyteller is better than the author who actually created the category or the subject or is an expert in it. So yeah, people like stories beat stats every day of the week.
Yeah. It was really cool listening to the conversations this morning. I was picking up on how many of these initiatives that you guys are heading up are tied to a personal story that's important to you, but that story is the basis for why you're pursuing this incredible thing that you're working on. And so yeah, it is everywhere. We're just maybe not as aware of it as we should be.
I think it works in less virtuous ways too. Like bullshitters can rise to the top of any institution pretty easily, and that's just one long tail.
Yeah, that's true. So Dilan, what are people missing out on? Because it's not that people don't consume fiction anymore. It's that we're not reading as many fictional books. We're watching movies. We're scrolling social media. What do you think people are missing out on if they don't do a deep dive into actual literary fiction and all they do is watch Netflix or go to summer blockbusters?
I question a lot of times whether like are people watching these things? Like one of the virtues of reading is like it's one of the few things that you can only do it. Like, you can't multitask through it. Like it demands your entire attention as you're doing it. You can't be on your phone simultaneously. So like, I think a lot of people tune into this Netflix stuff kind of just to tune out because they can okay, my brain can disengage here. I'm not going to miss out too much. Like I'll just kind of let it pass through me passively. In terms of what people are missing out on, and I've experienced this even though I have kind of maintained the habit of it. But like again, the beauty of fiction also is that you fill in. It's kind of like the talk we had earlier with the vision. It's like you're being forced to create these scenes in your head of very sparse, details with a little bit of ink on the page, and like that muscle. Like that imagination muscle, basically, in terms of having insights into like the field that you're working in, or just personal revelations. Like that's where that comes from. That's like the kind of subconscious underlayer where ideas appear out of nowhere. And I think if you let that atrophy and you just get fed images, which is all too easy to do, I think you just become can become a bit of an empty vehicle. Unless you're a painter, you're using it in other ways. But fiction is just like it's designed to be entertaining. It's an easy way to maintain it.
Yeah. Alex, I should have asked this as a follow-up because you already kind of touched on it, but since you do focus a lot on these like personal development type books, why? So I guess I'm asking you to elaborate more on what you already said of why does the storyteller win over the statistician?
I guess stories are the scaffolding you need to get the lesson across. If you think about the most educational books, they're textbooks. It's like here's a fact, here's a date, here's what happened. No one reads a textbook unless they're forced to. That tells you everything you need to know. And on the other side of the spectrum of books, you have fiction books, which are so entertaining, people consume them as if they're television or something. So you need the story to explain the lesson. You can't just tell people a lesson and hope they remember it. Like if I tell someone, get 1% better every day, they're not going to remember that. But if you Red Atomic Habits, the first chapter starts with is this bicycle team in England, and the coach just makes 1% improvements every day, and then they end up winning 4 gold medals in the Olympics. So you need the story to basically like hang those lessons on. You can't just give people the lessons.
I'm a huge fan of myths, and I love learning. I mean, growing up in Western civilization, I was most exposed to like Greek and Roman, Scandinavian, a little bit of Egyptian. But at this point in my life, I'm really looking into other cultures I have no idea of, because everyone has their own myths. And what fascinates me about them is that they were the educational tools of their time. Like it wasn't just their version of Netflix. Like the point of it was to try to instill values, try to share ideas. What is it about the format of fiction and fictional storytelling that you think works so well as an educational tool, despite it not being as straightforward as just a textbook? What is it good at teaching about? Like what is fiction good at helping teach?
Yeah, well, I suppose like the main virtue of, it can be gripping nonfiction too, but is this idea of immersion, where like, the world disappears and you're in it. And what fiction does is you're not being told, like the good fiction is you're not being told about a bad thing. You're like literally in there feeling it, embodying how like, piece by piece your life can fall apart if you start being dishonest or in some kind of way. And you follow the whole plot of the narrative and you're feeling it. It's like, when you read the word kick, it's like, there's like some paper about it, and it literally activates the brain, like the area cluster of brain cells that like when you actually kick something, like your brain is like, this is real. Like I'm actually here. Old wives' tales and stuff you tell children, like if I was told not to do something, I'd need like a really horrifying story not to go underage drinking. I'd need to you really need to convince me in some capacity with that way. Whereas like and that's what these myths were. They were cultural institutions, and that's why they're separate from law. They're not diktats. They're not just like do not. They're stories, and that's how they're transmitted, and that's how they kind of keep cultures cohesive. Because you need a storyteller and a storytellee. Yeah, there's kind of a horizontality there with that as well, which I think makes them stick.
So Alex, you're working on your own book right now, and you've already talked about how even good nonfiction needs to rely on stories. As you're looking for stories that support your arguments and your points, what do you find yourself using to kind of filter what would be a useful story to include versus one that like there's no point in including this one?
So I got a good tip from this author is like you want to have a famous person, like a new story about a famous person, like everyone knows Steve Jobs, but here's a story about him that almost no one knows about. Or you want the reverse, where it's like you want a famous story about a new person. So I learned recently that the guy that the Nobel Peace Prize is named after Alfred Nobel, who created dynamite, and a newspaper ran his obituary and they called him the Merchant of Death. And he didn't want that thing to be his legacy. So that's why he started the Nobel Peace Prize Foundation. So that's like a great story that a lot of people don't know about. So that's what I'm looking for, like famous people like Napoleon, who was a big reader, and finding stories about his like reading habits, or someone else that a lot of people might not know about, but like they just have like this incredible story behind them.
So now I want to have everybody share an example of one story that's had an actual impact on you, and I'll actually kick it off. This is more recency bias for me, but it's one that I just can't stop thinking about, which is so I just covered The Hound of the Baskervilles on my show with Sherlock Holmes, the greatest mind. And I found myself, as I was looking at his actual behaviors in the story, I was surprised to realize he made mistakes. I mean, not all the time, but like he made mistakes because he lived in a world of probabilities. And so he would take the best probability, and if it didn't work out, he'd move on to the next. But he had such a playful attitude towards when he made mistakes. He would just kind of brush it off, and he'd like tell Watson, like, you have to make sure to write about this as well when you write my successes. And that really got me thinking about how the value of the mentality that Sherlock Holmes had wasn't that he just was so genius that he would know the answer right away, but rather he had so much confidence that he would eventually figure it out, that no setback demoralized him. He didn't get caught up in feeling bad because he was wrong. And so I pulled one quote. There's a point in the book where he has several different threads of leads, and all of them come back dead. Like none of them panned out. And his response to that, quote, "There go 2 of my threads, Watson. There is nothing more stimulating than a case where everything goes against you. We must cast around for another scent." And so in the face of rejection and defeat, he almost takes it as this game of like, oh, this is just getting good. Like he has so much confidence that he will eventually get there. And that got me thinking about like, what if I could adopt that attitude when I'm tackling something that's very big and bold for me? Instead of it being like, I wonder if I can or can't, it's just, I just have to outlast this. I just have to have confidence to stick with it long enough until all the problems disappear, and then I'll be there. So even though it's in the process of changing me instead of having changed me already, I think about that often ever since I produced that episode about Sherlock Holmes. So Alex, let's start with you this time. What's a story that's had an actual impact on you?
So I think most of the people here have heard about David Goggins. He wrote that book, Can't Hurt Me. So the backstory is this guy was like 300 pounds working as a cockroach exterminator. Basically hit like the lowest point in his life. And he saw the TV was playing a documentary about the Navy SEALs. And he's like, that's what I want to do. So in 3 months, he lost 100 pounds. He had to go through Navy SEAL training 3 times. Then he joins the Navy SEALs. And like, as if that was enough, then he becomes an ultra marathon runner. So he starts doing 100-mile races, 300-mile bike rides. And that was just like the most motivational book I ever read. So I'm like, okay, Saturday morning, every morning I'm waking up and I'm running 5 miles. Whether it was like raining, whether it was like snowing or anything. So I did that like every Saturday for like an entire year. And just like whenever I don't feel like working out, I just hear the voice in the head, like, who's gonna carry the boats? So I absorbed like 1% of his like personality into my life. So now, even till like today, I'm running 5 miles like once a week, every week. And just whenever I don't feel like working out, I just hear him in the back of my head. So I feel like he's stuck with me, or I'm stuck with him. Yeah.
Dylan, how about you?
Yeah, there's a lot to choose from. One, and I think it's often like, that's also the skill of the author, is how they tap into a universal experience that is kind of recurrent, and they can reframe that for you. It's kind of Goggins-esque in a way, but and it's not technically a story, but it is. But The Myth of Sisyphus by Camus, the essay, I just go back to that all the time. It's like the struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart, which is kind of like very Goggins-esque like, in sentiment. But just that, you do the thing for the thing's sake while you're doing it, don't linger in the past or future, just kind of focus on what you're doing. And like that just kind of pops into my head all the time. I think also like I was read to as a child as well. So I think often the most formative ones, like practices like that, where it's like, it's at a level way below my memory, but like I feel like it's still there, and I assume it is in some capacity. There's a lot of stuff holistic. I also, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance as well. I read that when I was like 15 maybe, and I didn't understand anything. But I remember what my brain was doing. My brain was going in all directions, kind of concocting what things might be about. And it was like very formative, even though I got it totally wrong, and I reread it since. There's something interesting when you read just outside the kind of zone of understanding, and you're pushed a little bit beyond, your brain again kind of rushes in to fill gaps. So oftentimes it's been reading things early and not getting them that I kind of almost didn't prefer my interpretation of what they were doing, but that has lingered with me a lot more than having got back to them even.
So I alluded to at the beginning of this conversation that I believe fiction and nonfiction have unique advantages and value. So I just want to touch on that. Alex, what do you think are the unique advantages to stories in their nonfiction, like in the stories of real people, the value that they have into a life?
I think one advantage of it is like nonfiction is real. Well, fiction could also be real, but nonfiction is like, this was a real person, like this person did this, like why can't I do that? Like, I'm not gonna run 100 miles like David Goggins, but I can do part of that. So just the inspiration of, it's not like some hero in this mythical land, it's like this person from Texas or wherever he's from, they accomplished this, like why can't I do something similar? So when you have like a real person, a real example, I think sometimes it could be more relatable than a fictional character, but also fiction like could be just as relatable. So I think you could argue both sides.
But it's more of an actual blueprint rather than just inspiration.
Yeah.
Dylan, what do you think the unique advantages of fiction are?
I'd probably agree with that, to be fair. For me, it's like, it's very easy to lie with statistics, and like there's that kind of whole mantra, but fiction for me really resembles like the interdynamics of human behavior. So even though like, big capital H history, obviously there are concrete facts and details, but moving through the world, like the dialogue and like what is important isn't what people say, or what they're saying isn't what they're saying. And like having to parse the nuances when you're like reading, like a classic book, and like the subtextual levels that you have to go down to, and like you realize there's treason afoot because of the way someone said something, and that's how we operate through the world. We're trying to figure out people, and are they what they say they are, and what's really going on behind the brain. And that's also a difficulty for nonfiction, is like it can't access just the general psyche in the same way that fiction can, and it doesn't have the freedom to explore because, we don't know what's going on in there either. We kind of have to infer and invent things in that capacity. Yeah.
The moment nonfiction strays from just the facts, it's no longer nonfiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also the classic claim, or the study that was done, that people who read fiction rank higher in empathy. Like it's just you are experiencing the world outside of yourself.
I would say it depends what books you read.
Yeah,
there's a lot of slop you can read. It's not going to make you more empathetic.
Well, and I was going to say that something along those lines of, we talk about the value in reading, period, but there's so much out there that is probably not worth reading.
It's probably worse than not reading. Yeah.
And so to me, especially when it comes to, I talk about what I consider the greatest fiction ever written. My unproven hypothesis is that the reason those books stayed with us is because they tapped into what we feel is true in a way that you can't just categorize very clearly, but it just resonates. And so it became popular because this feels real. Even if the premise is so out there, it feels real just to understanding the human experience in a way, and that's why it resonates and gets popular and becomes considered a classic piece of fiction. But there is plenty out there that struggles to achieve that. So transitioning into getting the most out of reading, because I have a lot of theories and hypotheses, but I'm not a scientist, so I just have to keep them there. I think one of the biggest issues for reading across the board, and honestly any consumption, is that we engage with it completely passively, and that it would only take a 10% additional investment to take what we consume and turn it into something so much more valuable for us. But our habit is just to turn the last page, that was a fun read, or the movie ends, you're oh, that was entertaining or whatever, and we just leave it there. And in my opinion, we're losing out on so much introspective value, so much ability to just, again, consider, okay, why would that person act differently, or whatever the lesson may be. I want to pose to both of you the question of, what do you think is the difference between consuming a book and absorbing it?
You know it when you see it, or you know it when you feel it, type thing. You feel your eyes glazing over, and you're kind of excited to get to the end of the page, and you're you're already kind of glancing ahead to see how much black is left relative to white space. Yeah, I think it's as simple as that. You know when you're cheating it, because you're not in it, and you're kind of this. They look very similar. Looking at a ink on a page and periodically turning the page is very different to reading, and you know the difference when you're actually doing one or the other.
So I mean, if it is one that you are absorbing, what do you find yourself doing differently with the material you're consuming? How do you make it more of an absorption rather than I guess what I'm getting at is, how do we take the stories and not just leave it at oh, that was really good, I liked it, but how do I spend a little bit of effort into thinking about how could I apply this, or what are the steps I could take to be more like this person, or whatever it may be, but turning it into a platform to elevate ourselves, essentially.
Yeah, I don't think that's your job. I think you just read and you give every ounce of attention that you can, and then whether it lingers with you and stays and raises questions in days, months, years from now, that's just going to be down to the quality of the prose.
Okay. So your job is just to give an honest effort, and then
so.
let it speak for itself. I like that. Alex, you have any thoughts?
So I treat nonfiction books as if I'm back in college and listening to the professor give a lecture. If you could be in the class but not present, or if it's a really fascinating subject, you're going to be asking questions, you're going to be taking notes. It's the same thing while reading a book. If you're really into this book and you want to absorb it, write notes in the margins, highlight any interesting parts, ask questions so that you can look them up later. So treat it exactly like being in a college seminar.
Which is something a lot of us have tried to forget about having to do. But that's where the value is always going to require effort. But if you can make it something where you're choosing to put the effort in instead of it being for a grade, it's going to yield a lot more favorable results.
I also think there's a correlation between how good the book is, and how many notes you should take in it. If it's a really amazing book, you're stopping every couple pages to look away and process what you read, you want to take a lot of notes in that book. But if it's just a book that's repeating a lot of information you already know, it doesn't make sense to take notes on it.
So we're about to transition into letting Alex talk about his processes for getting more out of the books you read. But Dilan, I just want to ask you about your own habits of note taking, or whatever you do to I mean, I know you have a massive catalog of quotes and stuff you
Bit of a
pulled from your
psychopath, yeah.
reading over the years. So share a little bit about us of your personal process, and between the two people maybe pulling out ideas that they want to apply for their own.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't recommend my process even if I described it, but I love the idea of like a portable, because I moved around a lot when I was younger. Not like with my parents, but like just travel the world a little bit. So every book, I like to read physical, although often the types of books I'm looking for, it's either extortionate or just they just don't exist in anywhere that I can get them. So I do highlight everything I read, then I will get a PDF from wherever I happen to get a PDF, and then I will add my highlights into that and upload it. I have a Google Drive full, and then I copy all my highlights and I put them in a program called Scrivener, which is keyword searchable.
Okay.
So every note I've ever taken from anything I've ever read over the last 12 years, I have keyword searchable on my computer, which I just like for posting stuff and finding quotes and doing research for pieces I want to write, etc. But it's pretty laborious. I'm not sure how effective it is, but that's the way I like to do it.
Do you also use tags within there? If you're just like, I don't know the exact word I want to use, but I know the kind of idea I'm going after?
No.
Inside Scrivener? Okay,
No.
so it's purely... Right.
I've explored very little of the functionality of the program. I copy and paste what I want in it, and I know I can search a word, and that's it.
But yeah, like I said, he's always pulling out these things that are so varied that it's obvious you haven't just been reading all these things right now. It's pulling from years of collection and years of studying. So one of the reasons I wanted to bring Alex here and talk to him is because he's currently working on a book about how to read more, how to get more out of reading. And I wanted to give him a chance to kind of share some of the ideas with us. Because I think no matter how much you read or how little you read, we'd all benefit from reading a little bit more. So take it away. And I love what you were sharing at lunch about like how this is a kind of an update of an existing concept. So start there.
Yeah, so I've tried a lot of note-taking strategies over the years, and I found like the simpler the note-taking strategy, the more likely you'll do it versus a super complex one, which you'll never do or do once and then never again. So like if you're reading a print book, just whenever you're reading it, if you find anything interesting, I look for insights, quotes, and actionable advice. Just highlight the text and then go to the front cover, the inside of the front cover of the book, and just write down the page number and then a couple words or like one sentence about why you found that interesting. And if you just do those two things, by the time you finish the book, you'll have your own custom table of contents where you can see, like, here are the most interesting things I found from this book. On the back inside cover of the book, you basically want to read through your highlights again and summarize that. So it's like, okay, out of my most interesting highlights, just summarize it in your own words so that way you actually understand it. And then think about how can I actually apply that to my life, because everyone's life is different. They're going to find different aspects of the book interesting. And it's not just pulling out that information from the book, it's like figuring out how to actually apply it. Yeah, if you only do two things, just like highlight anything interesting you find, and then on the front cover of the book, just write down the page number and a couple sentences about why you found that interesting. Then you could go back to it like years later and just be like, oh yeah, on page 43, I love this quote, or on page 57, I love this lesson. And that way, the notes are always in the books themselves, and instead of having the notes someplace else where you could lose them.
I love the step about summarizing the highlights in your own words, because I think that represents that tiny act of kind of synthesizing it to make it your own. I mean, they talk about how you don't know something unless you can teach it, yeah. Right? And so how many times have I highlighted something in a book that I thought was amazing, but then if I want to reference it, I basically have to go find the quote because I couldn't say it as well. Yeah. But if I've taken the time to actually say it in my own words, then I own it a little bit more. You're basically making this book for the modern age because someone wrote one back before we had ebooks and audiobooks and all that stuff. So you're updating it for, what was the name again?
Mortimer Adler wrote the book How to Read a Book, which is like the classic book about books. But it was last updated in the 1970s, so that was pre-ebooks, pre-audiobooks, pre-internet. So I feel like, and a lot of people have lost or forgotten the skill of reading. So I think it's time to like teach people how to start reading again and teach them how to become like more productive readers.
And so since we're talking about that, I'll admit I am very much an audiobook person. I try to read physical more now because there is that experience of it. But I definitely get through a lot more if I include audiobooks. But I'm just curious about the habits. I mean, you just read PDFs like a psychopath, but like, do either of you, like, are you split between different formats? Are you much more like just one is your go-to?
Yeah, I would say I'm basically all physical books because I spend so much time on social media, on my laptop. Like physical books are like the only time where I get to disconnect from all of that the electronics, and you could take your book to the park, you could take it to the beach, you could take it anywhere with you. And I love the process of actually like writing the book. And there's also like studies shown that if you actually take notes by hand, like you'll remember more than just like typing it up.
Typing it. Do you dabble with audiobooks at all?
No, I don't like
You're a
audiobooks.
purist. I knew it.
What are you? Well, I ask, what are your eyes doing, or what are you doing while you're apparently reading? If you sit down with your eyes closed and you just listen to an audiobook, then that's reading. But if you're just like doing the dishes, it's a little different, I think.
Yeah, I'm just typically out on a walk. But how can consuming stories, fiction and nonfiction, help you make sense of the story of your own life?
I suppose number one, if you kind of think about the idea of archetypes, like something as simple as Icarus, it's like, it's crude and it's not as specified or refined. It's not going to match the details of your life. But I think there are so many, like the underdog story, like all of these archetypes, and like Vonnegut has his shapes or whatever. It can stop you going down a very dangerous path where you're like, well, the first 30% of this path is identical to thousands of others that are like classic tropes in literature, so maybe I should stop, Because I think there is a lot of more commonalities just because we're made of the same stuff. And I think we repeat a lot of the same mistakes or, have a lot of the same redemptions potentially as well. So again, maybe there's more inspiring stuff in nonfiction because, it's a tangible thing that guy really did that thing.
Alex, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, if I had to condense it down, the purpose of the story is to teach you what to do or what not to do. So actually one of my favorite books is a fiction book, The Picture of Dorian Gray, because that book teaches you what not to do in life, like don't pursue excess pleasure. So that was like one of the main reasons, like I don't really drink, I don't gamble, I don't smoke, like because like that book kind of scared me. It's like, oh, you seek out all this pleasure, you kind of like destroy your life, destroy your soul. Yeah, so anytime I read a book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, it's like, okay, are you going to teach me what to do, or are you going to teach me what not to do? And that's basically why I read.
That's fantastic. To close it out, I already kind of expressed, but I just think every story it's a simulation. It's a way for us to kind of live something that's not our own experience, but can help us understand other experiences so that we can actually have a broader sense of the world around us. And the more stories you consume, the more examples you're comparing across, and you'll find ones that resonate with you. I mean, we talked about story over stats in terms of the compelling nature, and one of my episodes I talked about the story of the choice of Hercules, where he's at the crossroads and he's being tempted by the goddess of vice and virtue of which path to go down. And I talked about how you could have all these stats of how being disciplined in your life and this and that lead to a better result. But if I'm in that moment, if I'm in the heat of a moment of a choice, I'm probably not going to remember a bunch of stats, but I can remember Hercules. I can remember that story of the one choice he made. And so I think having stories as reference points in our lives just helps us in so many different moments across. So thank you guys for joining me. I've had a great time chatting with you, and hope you guys just keep reading stories in every format. So thank you.
So what'd you guys think? It was so special for me to be able to sit down with two people who are so much deeper in the game of reading than I am and discuss the finer points of how story coding meaning is valuable no matter what source it comes from. Fiction, nonfiction, we can be benefiting from both. Leave me a comment with your thoughts on the episode, or better yet, tell me about a story that has impacted your life in a very real way. It's conversations like this that prove to me that as long as I'm alive, I will never run out of things to say on this topic. But that does it for this special episode of BTMC. Come back next week for the final novel of 2025. I'm excited. It's one that I've both been excited for and intimidated by for quite a while. So we're finally diving into some deeper waters. Until then, I'm Jameson Olson. This has been Becoming the Main Character. We'll catch you on the next one.